Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing Communications Manager at a Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we'll make them available on our website. Next slide, please.
Are we unlocked? There we go.
For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. We serve a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Today we are thrilled to introduce Don Day, Founding Chair, Oasis DITA Technical Committee. Don is a content engineer with deep experience on innovative authoring solutions and information architectures for structured, semantic content for the web and across the enterprise. He has led enterprise innovation efforts for more than 20 years, resulting in multiple patents, official recognition for his contribution to re-engineering IBM's information access, and designation as an OASIS Distinguished Contributor for his efforts convening and leading the OASIS Darwin Information Typing Architecture Technical Committee. Don provides consulting, strategy, technology, and best practices for optimizing the value and usefulness of unstructured data. Without further ado, welcome Don.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll switch over back to my slides. There we go. So just to back up, my topic for this presentation is how to amplify HTML5's features by using the strong form typing that's available in DITA. And so to get things started, I'll just set a little bit of context here. There's been a lot of discussion in both the web and the tech docs publications communities about intelligent content or smart content. And the reason is straightforward. Smart content helps to drive smart devices and to drive smart businesses, or at least that's the word on the street. So we'll be talking about some examples, both in DITA and HTML5, about how each solves particular design points for that goal. We're going to look at how they relate to each other and whether there's best union of the two for creating a smart content architecture. And then we'll go through some examples of such an architecture and close out by setting some expectations about what may come. So to start things off with, Adam, I'm curious to know what kind of background the audience has, and I'd like you to run your little poll, if you would, please.
Sure, just launched it. About a little bit more than half of the attendees have voted. Well, actually, about 80%, and 80% of them are saying XML authoring background.
Meaning the remaining are unanswered or web background?
Well, the remaining are web authoring background.
Okay, great.
So we're about 88% have voted, so we'll give it about 15 more seconds, and then I'll close the poll.
I think I'm ready to make my exit poll projection before the results are in, Adam.
And I'm going to close it now. There we go. And just to confirm, there was a 79% responded XML authoring background, with 21% saying web authoring background.
Okay, I appreciate you running that. This is about what I expected, and there will be something for each here. If you came expecting to see some new tools for DITA, you won't be left unsurprised. And Certainly for anyone coming from the web background, this will be an introduction to some technologies that could greatly extend the ability for your content team to create intelligent content on the web. So what is intelligent content? It's a game, if anything, and I've characterized it as a quest. It's a quest in the first place for adaptive content. Adaptive content simply means any kind of a rules-based amending of a URL request that comes in, and it does such things as respect whether a device has the right kind of screen size for the content you want to place there, whether it has the right amount of bandwidth to sustain a productive session with the user for the amount of content that you have prepared to send to the device. It expects whether the user may request a digest or an excerpt of the actual content. So rather than preparing a mobile site, an adaptive site will actively create digests or excerpts of the content that's on the standard site and retrieve that for the user to read, and avoids the problem of having to maintain two sets of content on a website. And then finally, for selective query results, typically when we do a Google search, we get back a list of whole pages of content. And wouldn't it be nice if you could actually search for a particular scope of content and get back only the paragraphs that that particular content was mentioned in? All of this is possible with the quest for adaptive content, which is possible if your content is smart to begin with. Another quest is the quest for personalization, which is a queue-based refinement of the selection that's based not on things that you sense about the device and about the transaction medium, but rather about the user preferences. Has the user requested that a particular kind of content and a particular kind of personalization be applied to the rendition that they get when they ask for content? And it may be based also on analytics, doing assessment like Google Analytics of requested searched terms and other things that may lead to an understanding of what this user's interests may be. There may be things you can learn about patterns of browsing or about habits that you may detect that lead you to understand whether the person is in fact a newbie to a subject or is perhaps a experienced practitioner, which may lead you to provide less coaching and more direct information. And then there's the quest for responsive web design. So we've provided all this information on websites, but as it goes out to browsers of all different types, how do we adapt that content to flow gracefully into those browsers? The concept behind responsive web design is that instead of having 2 or 3 different themes, depending on which device you need to route the content through, you have a single theme that adapts the flow of the content into the device itself, and this happens in the device rather than at the server, and is based on graceful tweaking of the behaviors of the theme, either through JavaScript or CSS, based on particular list of properties here, media queries that may be in your style sheet for the content, liquid and grid-based layouts that can resize according to the width of the screen, adaptive image resizing, which of course takes care of the problem of keeping an image from flowing off the edge of a smaller screen, and a non-restrictive viewport that enables all of this to happen without presuming that the browser is delivering content to a particular type of device that the viewport is set for. So all of this taken together means that we're enabling common content in a single theme to adapt the rendering of your content to just about any device and to any browser, which is all good stuff. But then finally, DITA itself, or the thing that may be the holy grail of content, is content reuse and repurposing. So when you're thinking of content both from a pub's point of view and from a content marketing point of view, you want your content ideally to be evergreen, and what that means is not necessarily ephemeral content like news and events and fads. These things you may publish one day and then the next day no one is interested in coming to look for it anymore. Typically, we're publishing sustainable content. This fits very well with the idea of tech pubs, which is the kind of information that users are coming to browse to understand the behavior and the use of their product that they've just bought. But it also includes the how-to information, which may be information contributed by other users of that product that help you to understand how to use it more effectively. It could be encyclopedic information, could be documentary information, and as well, certain blogs and opinion topics tend to have long shelf life for things you may find on the web. And the reason this is a useful property is that if it's going to be around for a long time, then you can actually make new uses of it by reuse or by repurposing the content into a new role or by republishing it into a new format. And again, this is possible if the information is structured as structured, intelligent content. So from a DITA author's viewpoint, we're going to just take a look at what a DITA author finds as valuable about DITA. So this is informing those of you from the web background. DITA is an XML format. It stands for the Darwin Information Typing Architecture. Darwin simply implies that it has a strong concept of respecialization or enhanced specialization of the content into new forms and new structures, all guided by an architecture that keeps it compliant within its architecture. That's where the A in the name comes from. And the information typing simply alludes to the fact that you are creating data models when you type this information into a new structure. So DITA has structure, it has semantics, and it has validation that comes from the fact that as an XML application, you can create a schema that ensures that every time you create or modify information, that it's being saved in a valid format. And this is a powerful value because it means that when you save your content, it's always able to be reused blindly by any complying application without running into difficulties because the information is not conforming or not valid for the use of that application. And we'll look at that as a strength that we'd like to be able to apply to the HTML side of things. HTML5, as you understand, lacks that validation. We'll look more at that in the next slide. Authors who create content in DITA understand that they can produce their output in HTML or HTML5 format, and sometimes you may have wondered what is the value of using HTML or HTML5, which one should I select? And we'll try to give you some background on the relative value of HTML5 and the areas where its benefits may be most obvious and most useful for assessing how you need to choose your output production. And finally, I just would point out with that although HTML5 gets a lot of airtime and you hear about it quite a bit, its benefits can seem elusive or not well explained, and many times being able to output it as HTML5 is not a hard thing to do, but understanding whether you're providing any new value to your content hasn't been well explained in the tools that you're using to do your production with. So again, we'll try to give you an understanding of what it is about HTML5 that would bring the best value to the user of your content and help you to make that determination. Now switching to the web content developer's hat. You're developing HTML5 content for content marketing, and you know what you need to do because you've consulted in your group with your programmers and your web designers, and they've recommended particular markup that they would like you to use. So you're probably very close to the understanding of the value of particular HTML5 constructs such as the article construct or the main construct. because your designers are working closely with you on it, and you're creating content that's going directly into the web page, making use of those semantics for the programming that they want to apply to it. They may be associating drag and drop behaviors to it. They may be creating other interactive regions based on the HTML5 markup. So what they're giving you are guidelines that represent the structures that they would like you to create, but you're the one who's responsible for ensuring that your content applies to those guidelines. And if you happen to stray, then it's easily likely that you'll create content that will not snap into the application that they've prepared for receiving your content. And so from that point of view, in the HTML5 world, consistency of markup can be problematic. And it falls back to an argument that you may have heard about blobs versus chunks. Typically in web content and in blog posts, most particularly, the content you create there is simply a long sequence of running content that is rich text but not necessarily identified as to which parts serve what kind of a role either for the reader or for any processing. And so a blob is typically not very interesting because it's not smart. Where your programmers want to move you to is creating content that has the appearance of chunks, which is being parceled down to a size that's appropriate, that it can be put into a database field with a particular label and therefore retrieved intelligently and used as content that they can plug into a responsive web theme or into interactions that they've created for your website. So looking at it again from the HTML5 author's viewpoint, you're probably closer to the action of being able to understand what the value is of the content you're creating, but you may be having a harder time making your web programmers happy in terms of consistency of that content. So how can we bring these two trains of thoughts together? We'll take a look at a couple ideas here. First of all, looking at DITA, let's do a review of the strengths and the value that it brings as a value proposition. DITA was designed to explicitly capture the web principle of resources and collections. When you type a unfinished URL and hit the enter key, the URL will typically respond by bringing up a series of possible hits that you may have been interested in. These are called collections. Once you select a particular item that you're interested in, that item's name will finish off the URL, and now you're pointing to a particular resource, a very discrete item. So on the web, everything is either a resource or it's a collection of resources in response to a query. And in DITA, we have given those names of maps, which is the collection of DITA resources, and topics, which is the DITA name for a resource. DITA instantiates the principles of reuse in three ways. First of all, there's reuse of content, and that's because the content can have scope and identity within the content and can have properties that allow selection based on the scope and the identity of that content in order to retrieve or reuse different portions of that content. So a very good example would be assigning a product name as a reusable string and then being able to cite that by reference in other places. A less common example would be that you may have created a particular caution text that needs to be repeated in multiple documents, and so you would reuse that content by, and it may be legally approved content, and therefore you don't want to have to send it to the lawyer every time you produce a new production. So you approve it once and then reuse it by reference in your new productions. And then finally, reuse of well, I skipped through it. Reuse of design is the principle of specialization of the content, which actually enables you to model your data and still retain compatibility with the back-end processing system. There, the processing will support being able to do queries against the content, being able to produce different kinds of renditions like HTML websites, web help, PDF output, and so on. The processing may support applying rules engines against the content for selecting which content gets sent out for translation, for example, and many more kinds of processing that can be done based simply on the fact that the content can be queried and can respond to serving the pieces that are of interest to you. So one way to put it is that for DITA, it has a legacy in technical communications, but its future lies in content marketing and web application development. Now, by contrast, in reviewing HTML5's and its strengths and its value, HTML5 supports improved support for new devices. So what that means is it actually is smarter about inquiring the device that you're bringing content up on and actually adapting fairly natively without a lot of particular JavaScript support that you need to add in for ensuring that applications will run easily. A very good example would be native support for audio and for video formats instead of having to explicitly create particular output formats that support Flash movies or MOV files. Another example of strengths in HTML5 are the technologies it provides for responsive page design. And again, that includes the media queries, different kinds of layouts, and the flexible images that we mentioned before, as well as the techniques for content and page design, which would be mobile-first development of content and applications, the ability to provide unobtrusive JavaScript and progressive enhancement on the content. This falls into the idea that your content should also degrade gracefully if JavaScript is not there. And technically, these are all part of an emerging ecosystem of processing. We're in the middle of it right now, and things are actually fairly exciting on this front. In fact, for one of the OASIS technical subcommittees that I'm on, the Lightweight DITA subcommittee, we're taking a close look at the emerging HTML5 support for introducing new tags, and we'll see an example of that. I'm not here to promote that idea necessarily, but just mentioning it as an example of an emerging technology that we have the potential to make more use of. Now, comparing the two, this is just a quick little chart. On the pro side, DITA is itself strong on internal structure and on supporting extensible semantics. On the con, XML processing has always been regarded in the web programming community as verbose and heavy-handed. In fact, even if you're from the DITA community, you may consider XML processing to be verbose and heavy-handed. So DITA, XML itself has a hard rap, but on the other hand, it does have that strength of being able to guide, to represent structure and be able to guide processing in a very useful way. HTML5, on the other hand, is strong on browser-based function and on the interactions it can support there, on the renditions that it can provide to the user through themes and through CSS styling, and overall on simply creating just the right user experience for the particular user that you have in mind. But on the con side, web processing has always lacked conformance and the ability to interchange your content with any other website and expect that their tools will be able to use the content in the way that your tools are adapted and set up for. One thing that the DITA community has and is very grateful for is the fact that all DITA content can be processed by any DITA editor and any DITA processing system. And so we're going to look at the opportunity to be able to provide that benefit across HTML5 websites as well. So when we look at the anatomy of an HTML5 web page, I've broken down a little block diagram of what you see when you bring up any page on the web. Let's say you go to CNN.com and you'll find that there's a header block on it, there's some kind of sidebar that we'll have navigation tools and advertisements. Typically there will be a feature article, which is there in the largest block, and then you'll have footer information, which has additional links or metadata. Most often just simply long-standing information that replicates from page to page as different content is pulled in or different views are shown. The post itself, the main content that goes into the large block, is highly structured. It typically has a title, may have metadata about the author and when it was authored, who the owners are of the content. It may have structured content within it that allows the browser to treat that content in a responsive manner, meaning hide some of it until the user interacts with it to show more. And then at the very most granular level, you have structure that applies to the content itself at the paragraph level. And within this little block of Greek to text, you can see that I have a title, which is a highlighted section, so that has a little bit of semantic identity. There's a body of content, and within that body of content, there's a link. And so I've got at least three different content structures inside here, and a fourth one if you include the black box that surrounds it all that says this is a widget or a chunk of content. Breaking down that page view a little more, now we have a comparison in this graphic of the HTML5 model and its most equivalent DITA model. So the HTML5 model is actually a template for the page that provides the context for all the things that go on the side, which would be the aside element in HTML5. This is where you would put the sidebar, again, all of your widgets or lists of links and queries. The post itself is in a main area. In fact, I used the word div there, but there's an HTML element called main that hasn't received as much attention, and you'll may be aware of it. This would be the only place that the main element would ever be used because it identifies for reading assistive tools, assisted reading tools, and other tools which content is the most primary part that the user wants to get at. Then finally, the footer element identifies where, again, that repeating information would typically go. The map itself in DITA doesn't identify all of the pieces, but it serves roughly the same role. It's the context for where the post itself appears in the midst of other things that set up its context, which might be the meta article. Then you have the post itself. When we drill further now into the post, what we find is that the post, the area that goes in that main chunk, is the resource itself. So when you inquire for a particular news article at CNN.com, then that news article is what's going to show in this part of the page, and the rest of the page we left behind as being part of the template that an article appeared in. So the HTML markup that applies to the post is indicated here. It would be the article element. It would be the header that sets up content at the top. There may be a footer at the bottom that may represent footnotes or endnotes or other information that you want, meta information that you want to float either to the top or to the bottom of the displayed area. You have your aside, which again can be used for notes or mini table of contents based on the JavaScript collection of headings that are in the article itself. You may have the short description, which is the lead-in information. Typically when you're looking at a blog, you see a list of titles and short lead-ins, and after you click on the read more, then you go to the full version of the article. So in DITA, a short description is very equivalent to a blog lead-in. And then you have the rest of the content. If we switch over to the DITA model, we see that the article and the topic are in fact very equivalent in terms of structure, organizing structure. There's a DITA title that's equivalent to the topic title that's over in the HTML5 model. You have your short description in DITA, which represents the lead in HTML-based content. You have your body where the rest of the article is produced, and then you have related links that can and that are typically other material that could be floated either to the side or put into a footer area. So this is just a general representation of the similarity at this level between what's in HTML5 and what's in a typical DITA topic. So with that understanding, what we can see then is that when DITA is used indirectly as part of the page production process, it can provide the structural validation that HTML5 lacks. And so I ask the hypothetical question, what if we had templates that could guide a reader's learning experience, guide their reader journeys, guide their task success, and more? So specialization in DITA allows you to set up those rules for the structure of a particular kind of information. This would be your information type or your content type, and you would select a template according to that particular content type. In DITA, it would be selecting a schema for that, and then you would be guided in your authoring tool to produce information that conforms to that structure. What if you had an environment that could capture an author's domain knowledge? So when we talk about semantics in content, this is things that the writer implicitly knows and that they're trying to convey. But many times the authoring tool that they're given has no ability to capture what they're thinking about what they're writing. So an example would be an engineer who's describing a particular mechanical process, and he wants to talk about volts and wants to talk about ohms and resistance, but the markup that's available through the editor is simply highlighting for bold or for italics, and so the engineer uses that particular markup and kind of expects that the reader will understand that when they see something italicized that they will know that that's a volt. So direct markup gives you the ability to actually say that that tiny chunk of information in the paragraph actually is a volt reading or a volt metric, so that an intelligent processing tool could select that out and make it available to a diagnostic tool that a field engineer may be using and actually compare their tool's measurements with the value that's provided in the documentation. By declaring those tiny pieces of domain knowledge using the vocabulary that the subject matter expert is familiar with, you're enabling future processing of that content in ways that you may not have imagined at this point in time. And then what if you had the ability to delight readers without exposing authors to special tools? And here I know as I speak to the technical authoring community that the tools we have for working with DITA content there appear to be placing the entire kitchen sink and everything else in the kitchen at your disposal for interacting with. And it's a powerful desktop environment tool that you have to work with, but many times that's an inadequate platform for putting in front of a subject matter expert just to get them to contribute what they know about something. And so when we talk about delighting authors, it's selecting the tool for their authoring that meets the needs that they have while still fitting within this intelligent content environment. And so that leads to the little picture I've got on the right, which is that the metaphor we're looking at here is power augmentation. DITA provides the structure, which is to say the mechanical legs, that enable the content produced as HTML to be able to go where it needs to go without having to have provided that structure itself. So what would a DITA as forms architecture look like? There's a separation of concerns and tools. You want to be sure that the right person is using the right tool. There's an enforcement of the HTML structure by DITA validation. And again, for the DITA author, they understand that when you've created content as DITA and then produce it to HTML, If they come back and reproduce that build again, it's just simply changing a word in the paragraph, that the surrounding structure of the HTML output will still be exactly the same as it was the day before because of this rigorous control of the production environment. So what we're going to be looking at is turning the tables and actually using this structure in DITA to enable it to set up this editing environment rather than expecting that a form itself would be used for creating an editing interface for authors. So I've got 3 examples queued up for you. The first example is what I'm calling a rigid structure for the language of series of books that are produced by XML Press. The first book in the series was done 3 years ago. It was called The Language of Content Strategy. At that time it was done using a Confluence wiki, and bless his heart, Dick Hamilton, the owner of XML Press, was able to set that up and enable it to work for the 52 authors who contributed to that version of the book, each one collaborating on a chapter of their own. But one thing that was unavoidable to all of the authors was the fact that they were working through a wiki, and all of the standard features of the wiki were exposed no matter whether they applied to you or not as an author. It's a common problem when you're trying to simplify a tool to adapt to the user, that the tool itself may not have the ability to hide the parts that a user at a different level may not need. So when Dick came to me last year, he and Scott Abel, who are the co-owners of the Language of series, asked if I would apply the Expedita toolkit that I've been working on, supporting a highly customized wiki that can support authors creating their content. This wiki uses a customized content type called a term that sets up the editing environment. And so all in all, it's a very consistent environment that is driven by the data structure in DITA itself. We'll go take a look at that environment here. I'll start up the main request and log in. So unless you're one of the authors with a sign-in, you won't be able to browse the site like I'm doing here, but I will at some point in time create a tour that will give you the feel of interacting with the content, only not having actual author experience, author field. I've just opened up my profile on this site of a book that's actively in production right now. You can see my information, which is set up just from a standard SQL form and a query. But the rest of the form here, the structured content term for my assigned term for the group was structured content. And so my term is rendered ready to edit in a form that looks very much like its rendered view. And so a thing to point out is that each of the headings here represents a section in a DITA topic, specialized DITA topic. That section's content type corresponds to a very trimmed down set of capabilities in a form. Here, for example, we have a content editable div that allows you to type anything, and if you know your keyboard, you can create content that may be bolded or not. Then further down, you have your essay, which can take a more substantive amount of content in it. In this case, we're guiding authors in creating up to 250 words of content. I'll just put my cursor in here and start typing a word, and I've just indicated that I've gone to 243, 244 words. So this is keeping live track of my conformance to the requested size for the content. And now it provides a rich text editor that allows me to interact with the content in a somewhat more substantive way. I could create a numbered list, for example, or actually create a block quote if I had that kind of content. So this gives me a richer editing environment, and once I'm done with it, I can update my term and then or create a new entry for my related links at the bottom and correspond with my editor on the quality and my progress in producing this particular piece of content. I'll shift now to a different view of this content, which is the database view. So each author gets to see this particular customized view, but the admins for the site get to see this view. So now I'm seeing my topic again just as if it were being displayed on the website. But I can see this content in different views. One view I can look at it will actually show the structure of the content. And so you can see that it's a specialized topic called a term topic, and that within the structure of the body there is a section for what, a section for why, and a section for the essay. You're seeing the literal content being rendered here, and I can switch into alternate views like the raw XML view that might be served via API to an app in a phone app, for example. But I'll just switch back to my normal views so that now I can compare the rendered view with the view driven by the content to create its own editor. So I'll edit as term. And essentially I'm creating the same content, but for particular areas of it, the regions that I want to interact with, I'm creating a form control for that content. So where I had a title, I've now created a form control or an editable region for the content of the heading that sets up that that particular region. And the same for the structure for the section that has the what is it content, and on down to the why is it important, and for the essay itself. You may take my word for it that this was all generated by the structure of the content using XSLT. To see that a little more carefully or a little more specifically, we'll go to another example now. I'm just trying to remember which one was my live site. Here we go. I need to change tabs, not change applications. So that was the language of book series, where I had, again, looking back at the title here, I had a rigid structure for the content, and that my takeaways from this is that specialized DITA topic can model the form that's needed to be able to add or to update the content for that topic. The current theme itself can treat both the live view and the editing view identically, apart from the introduction of the editing controls for it. And so what we have effectively here is WYSIWYG with structure. The structure is created by the DITA topic itself, which creates the structure that HTML lacks, but which will be regularly created now that I've based it on a fully validated DITA topic. So that was a highly rigid application. Here's what I'm going to call a looser definition of a form. And this is using elements in DITA that are specialized to represent a form. So a DITA definition list is actually close to the salient structure of a form, where the DL element represents the form element, the DL entry represents the field group for a particular definition, the DT element represents the term or the label, and then the DD element, the definition description element, supports whatever it is as content that you want to put into the form, whether it's an input or a comment for a form. So a fully specialized structure like this would be enforced by editors, and they would allow you to create forms according to your form specialization. I actually used hinting to create the structure so that editor enforcement is not available because there's no schema for this yet. But this turned out to be actually a potentially useful concept. And so when you display the document itself is the live form. And when you press the submit key, the processing in the background can interface the structure of that form to create a brand new SQL table. And then having created a table, insert the newly created content into it. So we'll go to a demo for that, which is again using the same base tool as I had created for that other website that we just came from called DITA. And here I've got a form that represents an event. Is it a real DITA form? We'll take a look at the structure of it and see that yes, it's a standard DITA concept. It could have been a topic. And within that concept I've got a definition list. The behavior of it on the screen is controlled by this particular output class that says I'm going to treat it as a form. And from here on in the XSL, everything that happens inside here is creating it for a form-based application rather than for rendering it as a standard definition list. So within the DL entry I can create my event name. The theme that I'm using doesn't allow me to widen the field, but I can shift back and forth here. So within this particular DL entry, I've created an XREF, which I've used as the base for my input control. And this seemed appropriate because an XREF is actually a query to content that may be elsewhere, which is the semantic of base semantic of what a query is. So what we're saying here is this query is going to get content if it exists out of a database called DB events with a table name of events and with a field name of event name. And if that content exists, we'll drop it into this area. Or if it doesn't exist, we'll create the input area that you need for modifying it or putting new content into. And so this is capable of supporting several different content types. If we go back to the normal view of it, again, we'll see that I can treat this as, let's create something called a DCL webinar. And it's a webinar type. And my description is that to be held on April 20, 2000, Magna Carta era there, 2016. And if I say, let me add that event, this one actually created a table, but it's got all the information that can set up a table based on the DB, a database called DB events, a table called events, and then with the various field names with the values that I've just passed through to it. So this is interesting. What it means is that your DITA structure can actually represent an application and can interface with applications in the back end. This makes it hugely valuable as a quick way, an easy way to set up a form and then have live setup for the database in the background so that you can define your intelligent content as a definition list and then start pumping content into the database. So rather than storing your content about the event in the article, you're storing the content about the event in a database and using the article as the form for creating that storage system. Let's go back to looking at our takeaways here, and that's that DITA behaviors still apply, which means that for the pieces that are in the form, I can still apply instancing and referencing on the elements by conref. And again, that's the DITA mechanism of doing content reference I can share this content with another application, or I can instance fields into this field by conrefing them in. And I can do conditionality on the view as well. So based on or based on who is logged in, I can condition certain views from actually showing in the form. In effect, as I mentioned, I'm using the document itself as a schema rather than an external schema. The document defines the data structure, and the database holds the information that I've sent to it. The rendered form then itself could actually be copied. So if I go in here and I do a view as on the, no, I won't do it now, but I could do a view as source and actually just copy this structure out and plug it into an application, and it would be a ready-to-go HTML form. And so you could look at this, in fact, as a form generator that has the benefit of applying the local theme style to the rendition of it. The final example that we'll look at deals with lightweight DITA. You've probably heard a great deal about lightweight DITA. It's an activity by the OASIS DITA Technical Committee to take some forward-looking design concepts and apply them to a profile of the standard DITA definition. So in programming, a profile means a use of a particular standard in a very restricted way, but a standard restricted way, so that people who are developing tools according to that profile can develop competitively with each other as far as fulfilling the requirements of the profile, and then compete on the basis of other features outside of that minimum capability that's defined by the profile. So lightweight DITA is a profile of regular DITA, and it's intended to do a couple things. It's intended to define equivalence between HTML5 as a content creation format and Markdown as a content creation format, and potentially other formats. Those are just two that we're looking very closely at right now. And being able to define them in such a way that they can represent DITA, lightweight DITA constructs. So in effect, if you've created the right kind of a lightweight DITA HTML version, then it's fully equivalent to the lightweight DITA XML version or the lightweight DITA Markdown version. In this case, this particular example is going to show an HDITA, H standing for HTML, instance that will adapt itself to being stored in a DITA CMS simply by processing the instance. The standard DITA structure that is then created as it's converted into DITA will set up its own forms-based editor, and then when we click on the Submit button, we'll actually be able to see that changed information passed to the back end. And I'll just talk about the takeaways so that we can look at them as we go through the demo. That in the premise of lightweight DITA, we're managing non-DITA content as if it were structured content. And that in this DITA equated structure, the so-called HDITA structure, it is itself effectively a piece of conforming DITA just by virtue of conversion into DITA. The particular methods that you'll be looking at here are not necessarily what will end up being the final result of the subcommittee's design work. There's a great deal that's still left to be done, and so taking a quick look so we can have some questions. I've just run a conversion on this HTML5 article, and you'll recognize from the image that I had earlier that this is a standard piece of HTML5. In fact, even these tags here called section steps are making use of an HTML5 feature called composed markup. And so with that, we can clean up the stream, then convert it into DITA, then convert that into editable DITA, where the structure of the DITA generates the form, and then finally have our form itself, where I can say, instead of how to do something, I'd say how to do something wonderful. And then when I update that, then I see that I've passed that particular change to my backend that I can make use of. So I'm going to sail through to the end here. Just a note about timelines is that in terms of the lightweight DITA activity, good things take time. I've been saying it's a year out for the last year now, and that's still my current advice. But if you are interested in taking part in it, let me know, and I'll get you connected with that activity. And I think you'll find that there's some very interesting things going on there, as you just saw in my demo. And then for the XDITA project itself, which is what I've been using to serve these slides and serve all of these examples, my status with that is to create an open source version based on a minimal viable product that I still haven't decided what will represent that. That will validate the components that actually go into that release version. There's some things that I want to save for myself as a consultant, but you've seen the full power of what's in the XDITA demo here. And so with that, Adam, we can open it up for questions in what time we have remaining.
Great. Well, thank you, Don. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them through the questions box, and we'll give it a couple of moments. And just as a reminder, everyone, this webinar was recorded and will be available in the archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Let's give it a couple more moments. And
yeah, and while we're waiting, Adam, I can speak to the aspect that this is intended to be a demonstration of innovation with DITA. You may never have seen DITA used in a way like this before, and I really hope to encourage those who are out there who are interested in doing other exploration that we can sure talk about using DITA for more than documents. DITA for data. How about that?
Well, Don, I got one question. It was more of a statement, and it was from a friend of yours wishing you a happy birthday.
Well, it is my birthday, and I appreciate that so much. And had I thought about that more, Adam, I might have selected a different day because I've been getting, there's one, birthday greetings all day long, and I haven't figured out how to turn notifications off generally in Windows yet, so those have been popping up. Case in point.
So on that note, I want to wish you a happy birthday, and I want to wish you a happy birthday, and and thank you for this wonderful webinar, and this will conclude today's broadcast.
Good.
Thank you, everyone. Great. Thank you. You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye all.